Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Former Special Counsel Robert Muellers testifying before the House Judiciary and Intelligence Committees today about his investigation into Russian interference in the 2016 presidential elections and the issue of obstruction of justice. His report was handed in 124 days ago, but only a redacted version was made available to the public. His deputy, Aaron Zebley, who oversaw the day-to-day activities of the investigation, is expected to also be present in an advisory capacity after a request from Mueller. Zebley will reportedly be sworn in to the House Intelligence hearing. Ahead of today's highly anticipated hearings, House Intelligence Chair Gerald Nadler slammed the Justice Department's directive that Mueller remain within the boundaries of the public version of the report. The department also said Mueller could not discuss the conduct of uncharged third parties, which includes President Trump, his family, and his close associates. On Tuesday, Trump railed against former Special Counsel Robert Mueller's investigation during a speech at an event for conservative high school students in Washington.
I have an Article 2 where I have the right to do whatever I want as president, but I don't even talk about that because they did a report and there was no obstruction. After looking at it, our great Attorney General read it. He's a total professional. He said, there's nothing here. There's no obstruction.
The report found that the Trump administration or the Trump campaign did not collude with Russia in the 2016 election, but it formed no conclusion about obstruction of justice. President Trump also renewed attacks on the 4 progressive congresswomen of color, widely referred to as the Squad. He repeated his claim that they hate our country and called Michigan Congressmember Rashida Tlaib vicious and a crazed lunatic, referring to a 2016 video showing Tlaib heckling Trump when he was running for president. Again, he was speaking to high school students. Puerto Rico Governor Ricardo Rosselló is expected to resign today. El Nuevo Dia first reported the news late last night. Rosselló has faced nearly 2 weeks of mass protests demanding he step down following a massive leak revealing sexist, homophobic and violent text messages exchanged between Rosselló and government officials and unofficial advisors, in which he mocked victims of Hurricane Maria and joked about shooting San Juan Mayor Carmen Yulín Cruz. In immigration news, CBS News is reporting thousands of migrant children could be locked up indefinitely at the southern border. Most of those at risk are unaccompanied. Officials from the Office of Refugee Resettlement say Trump's hardline immigration policies are having a chilling effect on potential sponsors, which may result in children languishing in ORR detention centers for years, only to be transferred to adult migrant prisons when they turn 18. There was a dramatic decrease in the percentage of children released from ORR custody in 2018 as compared to previous years. In Texas, authorities have released an 18-year-old U.S. citizen who'd been detained by immigration agents for over 3 weeks after he was taken in at a Border Patrol checkpoint miles away from the border. Francisco Erwin Galicia was detained with his younger brother as they traveled to a soccer event in Texas last month. He showed proof of his Texas ID that requires a Social Security number, which is only given to U.S. citizens or those authorized to work in the U.S. Galicia's lawyer says she supplied multiple documents proving the teenager's citizenship, but border agents refused to release him for weeks, saying the documents were fake. Francisco Erwin's 17-year-old brother Marlon, who was not born in the U.S., signed a voluntary deportation order and is now in Mexico. New York Congressmember Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez expressed outrage at Galicia's treatment, tweeting, "CBP is detaining American citizens. How would you feel trapped in a border camp where guards wear face masks because the human odor is so strong? When we allow the rights of some to be violated, the rights of all are not far behind," she tweeted. Meanwhile, a community in Hermitage, Tennessee, prevented ICE agents from taking a man into custody by forming a human chain around him and his son Monday. ICE agents tried to intercept the man, who's been living in the community for 14 years, after he left his home with his son by blocking him into the driveway. But neighbors saw what was happening and quickly went to offer support, bringing water and supplies to the pair as they stayed in their van. After a standoff lasting several hours, community members formed a human chain so that the father and son could exit the van and re-enter their home. The ICE agents only had an administrative warrant rather than a warrant signed by a judge, meaning they could not enter the man's house or van without consent. Immigration officers eventually left the scene. Neighbors say they're prepared to jump into action again if ICE reappears. President Trump threatened to retaliate against Guatemala for failing to sign a so-called safe third country deal with the U.S. In a tweet Tuesday, he threatened to impose tariffs, remittance fees, and an unspecified ban on Guatemala. Earlier this month, Guatemalan President Jimmy Morales canceled a trip to Washington, D.C. after a court in Guatemala blocked the signing of such an agreement between the two countries following a massive outcry. The deal would have allowed the U.S. to send migrants from any country of origin in the world to Guatemala instead of processing asylum requests at the U.S. border. The Justice Department has opened an antitrust investigation into big tech companies, which could include Google, Apple, Facebook, and Amazon. They're looking into whether companies' search, social media, and retail practices stifle market competition. The House Judiciary Committee is also investigating anti-competitive practices in big tech. In more tech news, the Federal Trade Commission is reportedly planning to file a complaint that Facebook misled users about how their personal data was used. The complaint alleges some advertisers were able to access users' cell phone numbers as part of an early version of the two-factor authentication process. The FTC also reportedly alleges Facebook did not sufficiently inform its users that they could disable a facial recognition feature which identifies and tags photos. The Senate confirmed Mark Esper as the new Secretary of Defense Tuesday. The Pentagon had been without a confirmed secretary for 7 months after James Mattis exited in December last year, the longest period ever without a permanent head. Esper, as a former aerospace executive, was a top lobbyist for Raytheon. 5 of the 8 Democratic senators who voted against Esper are 2020 presidential candidates: Elizabeth Warren, Cory Booker, Kirsten Gillibrand, Kamala Harris, and Amy Klobuchar. FBI Director Christopher Wray told members of the Senate Judiciary Committee Tuesday crime driven by racism and white supremacy is on the rise compared to the previous year, and that his agency recorded about 100 arrests for domestic terrorism in the past 9 months.
A majority of the domestic terrorism cases that we've investigated are motivated by some version of what you might call white supremacist violence.
During his testimony, Wray also said Russia's intent on interfering with U.S. elections and that China represents the greatest counterintelligence threat to the United States. Wray declined to answer most questions about former Special Counsel Robert Mueller's investigation. Senator 2020 candidate Kamala Harris and Congressmember Gerald Nadler introduced a bill Tuesday that would decriminalize marijuana at the federal level and expunge low-level marijuana offenses. Legislation also invests in communities of color, which have been disproportionately targeted by harsh drug laws. The Drug Policy Alliance praised the bill, saying marijuana convictions have disrupted people's lives, from one's ability to secure or maintain employment, housing, funds for education, a valid driver's license, to the ability to keep one's kids or remain in this country for non-citizens. The Marijuana Opportunity Reinvestment and Expungement Act ends prohibition in a way that centers communities most impacted by criminalization, they said. Former Vice President, 2020 presidential candidate Joe Biden unveiled his criminal justice reform proposal that he says will reduce incarceration and the criminalization of poor communities and communities of color. The plan proposes ending cash bail, supports eliminating the death penalty, and eliminating unfair sentencing discrepancies in drug offenses. He does not call for the legalization of marijuana at the federal level. Since announcing his 2020 run, Biden has come under attack for checkered track record on race issues, including his role in the 1994 crime bill that helped fuel mass incarceration and directed billions of dollars toward building more prisons. The Senate overwhelmingly passed a bill Tuesday to permanently fund the September 11th Victim Compensation Fund, which provides health care for first responders to the 9/11 terror attacks. First responders have been lobbying for its passage over recent months as the current legislation was set to expire next year. Trump is expected to sign the bill into law. President Trump sued New York State officials on the House Ways and Means Committee Tuesday in an attempt to block his state tax returns from being turned over to lawmakers. New York passed a bill recently allowing Ways and Means Committee Chair Richard Neal to obtain Trump's returns, but he has so far been unsuccessful in obtaining the returns through subpoenas and other means. 16-year-old Swedish climate activist and founder of the school strike for climate, Greta Thunberg, addressed French lawmakers Tuesday, urging them to act to prevent a climate breakdown.
And I believe that the biggest danger is not our inaction. The real danger is when companies and politicians are making it look like real action is happening, when in fact almost nothing is being done, apart from clever accounting and creative PR.
An intense heat wave is currently sweeping Europe. The French town of Bordeaux broke its high-temperature record Tuesday, reaching over 106 degrees Fahrenheit, while Paris could also break its record this week. The unrelenting heat is causing drought conditions elsewhere in France and exacerbating massive wildfires in Portugal, with Spain also on high alert for more blazes. The UN warns such extreme weather events in Europe will become more frequent and more intense as the climate crisis worsens. Scientists say July is on track to become the hottest month ever recorded. We'll have more on the climate crisis after headlines with author and director of the Earth System Science Center at Penn State, climate scientist Michael Mann. And in Washington, D.C., climate activists from Extinction Rebellion staged a civil disobedience protest Tuesday, calling on lawmakers to take action on the climate crisis and to pass the climate emergency resolution introduced earlier this month by Senator Bernie Sanders and Congressmember Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Activists superglued themselves to doorways in the underground passageways connecting congressional offices with the Capitol building.
How do we mobilize our entire nation to fight the Nazis, and yet we can't even mobilize one single resolution to save our entire species?
We've known about this trend for decades, and we still have done absolutely nothing. Especially who's known about it is the fossil fuel companies. They've known it's in their records, but they wouldn't say anything because they wanted to keep making profits.
Also on Tuesday, Extinction Rebellion activists in San Francisco staged a protest and die-in at House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's offices, demanding she take immediate legislative action on climate change. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman.
And I'm Juan Gonzalez. Welcome to all of our listeners and viewers across the country and around the world.